It says on the calendar OMM packet number 1.
Yes. That was due Tuesday. So remember,
Take them.
your Mice and Men packet. If you have it, go ahead and give it up, okay? I had about 20 kids turn it in. It looks like this, remember?
I'm looking at the wrong thing.
Okay. It was your vocab terms, your questions, and then your characterization.
Packet 2 is doing music.
Yes.
You're gonna do that on
Alright, so listen up, eyeballs, everyone. Tony, okay? Stop what you're doing and look at me. Okay, so Of Mice and Men obviously dabbles in some difficult subject matter, okay? We've dabbled in racism. We've dabbled in sexism, by the way the wife is treated correct, okay? We're dabbling in the way that Lenny is treated. No, okay, anymore.
dabbling.
Malachi's like copying me as I go.
Morty.
Okay. Today, what we're really going to get, and we've dabbled in the conditions of migrant farm workers. Okay, for those of you who were not here yesterday, you were only supposed to read Article 1 of Harvest Gypsies with the sub, and you guys were supposed to dissect that in your groups and then together as a class. Apparently, it was really difficult for him to understand, so I couldn't portray it to you guys. So,
Wait, are we doing that today?
no. But that article was supposed to give you guys some context into why John Steinbeck would write this type of novel. Okay. Are you guys copying all of my mannerisms at this point? Okay. I'm gonna know exactly what I look like when I talk after this talk. So today, what we are doing is we're going to look at the way that those with intellectual disabilities were treated in the 1900s. Okay, is anyone familiar with this history? A little bit Malachi, a little bit Kayla, a little bit Rhea, okay, a little bit Jillian and Enid. All right. Just like a lot of things in history, it's not pretty. Okay? It's not pretty. And even today with mental illnesses, with depression and anxiety and these mental illnesses, we haven't found a great way to treat them. Right? As a society. That's why a lot of people struggle with mental illness. If we had a solution, not everyone would struggle with mental illness. Okay? So today what we're going to look at, what I would like you to do, is anyone like looking at this on their computer and wants to look at the timeline on their computer?
Nope.
Okay. So, can I trust you? Okay. So everyone else, close your computers. We're going to look at this timeline together. If you are stuck on looking at it on your computer, that's fine. It's a timeline.
I can't open it.
Okay. So, I would prefer that you look up here, but if you really want to look at it on your computer, that's fine. But I should not see you doing anything else. Alright. So this is a document that kind of shows the timeline of the rights of those with intellectual disabilities. Okay? So, like Lenny in this book, right? Where he needs someone to help guide him through life. He needs that person, right?
I accidentally did today's assignment yesterday, so I read it already. When George was like saying that he was scared and stuff, like he wanted to protect Lenny, was it because he was scared that he was gonna get put into one of the institutions? That's what I thought it was.
Yes. So,
They had those back then?
yeah, we're going to go over that, okay? They didn't have rights. They couldn't make decisions. Yes. Okay. So we're going to talk about that. So the reasons that Elijah, let's come sit by Rhea or in between Caleb and Rhea. There's no reason for you to be there.
I didn't do anything.
No, it's just because
Your computer, not his Chromebook.
you literally don't have a seat. Is this your Chromebook, Elijah?
Yeah.
It's not a punishment. It's just back there. That's not the rest there. Here. Sure. If I was punching someone, I would have punched Levi for closing this computer.
He closed my
He
computer.
closed his.
I didn't close it.
All right. So let's talk about this. Also, I want you guys to be Johnny Headphone. As we're talking about this, I want you guys to be open-minded. I want you guys to be respectful and mature. Charles, are you with me? Okay. We're talking about difficult subject matter, so I don't want jokes to be floating around. I want you guys to actually like take a look at this and take a critical eye. Okay. So put on like our serious hats. I'll try to wear a serious hat throughout the whole day. I don't know if we'll get through a whole day with me being serious, but I'm gonna try. Okay. Elijah, what did I just say to you? Okay. So let's move the giant stack of computers out of my way. I look over and Ashley like. Okay. So, The term mental retardation was used back in this period, okay? Today, if one of you was to say, oh, you're being retarded, what would I say as a teacher?
Different choices.
5 push-ups, yeah.
CCR.
I would tell you to find a different term, okay? Because it's not appropriate, it is derogatory, and it's not in today's context, alright? So, in 1900, what's in a name? The accepted clinical terms for an intellectual disability include imbecility, so like an imbecile, feeble-mindedness, and mental deficiency. Okay, think about the connotation of the word imbecile. Okay? So if you had an intellectual disability like Lenny, he was categorized as an imbecile, or he had imbecility. Okay? So segregation and isolation are the norm. So remember how we talked about in Harlem or June Gifford what segregation was? Remember that? Okay? So those with an intellectual disability were literally kept in a separate area. Okay? You could not communicate. So the popular belief is that intellectual disability is synonymous with poverty, sloth, crime, and basically not getting married or things like that. Okay? So I want you to think about, if you were poor, if you were homeless, Tony, it was blamed on your imbecility, okay, or your intellectual disability. So in today's world, if we see someone who is homeless or is struggling with money, right, your thought is like, I want to help this person. We're going to find ways to get housing. We're going to do this stuff. Back in this time, it was you deserve to be on the street. Okay? The segregation and isolation. Right.
The sexual prolificacy, was that like kind of when they said that he was accused of like rape when he touched a girl's dress?
So this is basically saying that because you have an intellectual disability, you can't have kids. You might not get married. Okay, you might be seen as like something other than what you are. But yeah, also in this time period, they wouldn't have been like, oh, he has an intellectual disability. He doesn't understand that by grabbing her dress, she could think that she was being assaulted, right? They wouldn't have been like, oh, I get that at that time period. They just would have remember we talked about lynching Reagan? How mass mobs would come and kind of do the justice rather than the courts doing it? That's what would have happened, and that's what was happening. That's why they ran out of weed, right? So all of these issues were blamed on the intellectual disability. Okay, so that's in the 1900. 1904, the first textbook about intellectual disability comes out, okay? It suggests that hereditary factors play an important part. In 1907, this is where it gets real bad, okay? This is literally what the United States did. In 1907, there was an involuntary sterilization law. Everybody look at me.
Lobotomy.
Okay? No. It's not what that means. What does involuntary mean? Johnny? Okay. So, for instance, writing an essay is involuntary in my class, right? You don't have a choice. You won't write an essay. Okay? In this situation, they were involuntarily sterilized, which means because you had an intellectual disability, they were going to make sure you could not have a child. Okay? So you were sterilized. So as a woman, if you had an intellectual disability, you were sterilized. You could not have children. If you were a man, you could not have children. Okay? They did a surgical operation on you. So can you imagine, because you had a disability, like Lenny, someone decided that you could not have children? Okay? Involuntary. Yes, Kaden.
So, like, how, like...
Are you going to ask about the actual surgical operation? Because I don't know.
No, because, like, how bad of, like, the disability, like, did it have to be for them not allowed to have children? Like, if it was minor, would they still say, no, you can't have children?
I don't know the specifics. I could research it for you, or you can research it on your own. But someone, a doctor, or probably a doctor would determine if you had feeble-mindedness, as that said, that you had an intellectual disability. So it would have to be diagnosed, correct? So that's how you were treated, okay? So imagine your rights as a human being. If someone can say, some governor or some official in the government can say, okay, because you have an intellectual disability, you did not get the opportunity to breed, basically. You cannot have an offspring, you cannot have a child. So think of where their rights are at this point in history. Not much, okay? Now we go to 1912, rise of eugenics, okay? So it basically says they really focused on the heritability of intellectual disability, and they aimed to isolate people with disabilities from the community and establish forced sterilization laws. Alright, so someone like Lenny, who has some disability, right, he needs George in order to guide him through life. He is going to have forced sterilization, and he's going to be isolated from everyone else in the community. Okay? So again, where are we at in terms of human rights? Okay? We're not good. We're not in a good place. So that's 1912. That's about 100 years ago. Okay, anyone have a 100-year-old grandma or grandpa? Okay, I have a 97-year-old great-grandma. Yes, so in this time period, that's what it was like. Okay? So now we get to 1920. The institution system expands. Okay? Nationwide institutions for people with intellectual disability rapidly reach capacity. Alright? So just like a hospital, right? You go to a hospital if you're sick. In this situation, in institutions where if you had an intellectual disability, you were put in this institution and isolated and segregated from the rest of the community. Okay? At this point in history, it was almost like contagious. Can you guys imagine that? Like how they're treated, right? It's almost like this contagious view of it. So then where are we at? 1930 to 1950, institution overcrowding. Number of people with intellectual disability in state-funded institutions grew from 60,000 in 1930 to 140,000 in 1950. Tony, you shouldn't be using your mouse. You should be looking at a timeline. Close your computer. Okay. So, what is 140,000 minus 60,000? Someone do math for me. 80,000. 80,000, okay? So the number of people in institutions grew by 80,000 in 20 years. Alright? You guys know what's happening with the prison system right now, right? We have a lot of overcrowding in prisons. And that's why they just did the criminal justice reform bill, where they're making drug offenses not as difficult. So if you have a drug offense, you are in prison for 30 years. Because there's so many people in prison, okay? Same thing here. There were so many people in these isolated institutions that it was overcrowding. So that's what's happening in this period of time, okay? Now if we go up to 1933, what's in the name? Look at the connotation of the name. Remember what we talked about, how it was categorized? In terms, you guys know what connotation means? Have we gone over that? Kind of a head nod or head no? Did we go over that? Okay, so think of the word chicken. What comes to mind? Okay, an actual bird. Alright, now if I said, Levi, you're a chicken for not jumping off that bridge. Am I calling you a bird? I'm calling you like a scaredy cat, right? Okay? So connotation and denotation. The denotation is the literal meaning, so the bird. The connotation is the feeling you get behind the word. Okay? So think of the word like we talked about earlier when it was called mentally retarded. Think of the connotation behind that word. It's not pretty, right? It doesn't give you good feelings inside. Same thing here, okay? So American Association for the Study of the Feeble-Minded changes its names to the American Association on Mental Deficiency. Okay, so maybe we've gone up a level. We were called the Association on Feeble-Mindedness, which is just not pretty. Now we're maybe making some progress in calling it the Mental Deficiency Association, okay? 2 years later, in 1935, we have state-sanctioned sterilization skyrockets. Okay, so remember we talked about sterilization? Stating because you have this, you can't have kids. And I, as the government, am going to make that decision for you. Okay? You don't deserve to have children. So efforts reached their peak during the Great Depression. By 1937, a reported almost 28,000 people with intellectual disability have been forcibly sterilized. How sad is that? It's really sad. Okay? So, nationwide, 1946, sorry. Slaves or patients. An article detailing the poor conditions inside Maryland's Rosewood State Training School is published in the Catholic Worker. Let's read this quote. 1,200 patients, many of whom should be capable of ultimate return to society, are trapped there. It should be to the same of every person that such a situation can exist. Okay, Kaden, stay with me. Okay, so think about this. Eyeballs, everyone. Okay, if you're a war veteran, you went to war, and you lost a leg in war. Are you okay, Charles? And you lost a leg in war. You have a disability, correct? Can you still contribute to society? 100% absolutely. Okay? So this type of disability is, can Lenny contribute to society? 100% he can contribute to society. Okay? Do you think he could tend a good rabbit farm? I'm sure he could. He loves those rabbits. Okay? He might kill a few of them. Johnny.
When you said war veterans, is about to be 30 and he was in the army and he has like really, really bad PTSD, but he still does his part.
Yes. So just because he has that disability, right, that doesn't mean he can't contribute to society. But that wasn't the belief here. Stay with me, Malachi. In this day and age, that belief wasn't there that you could contribute to society just because you had a disability. All right? Their belief was you need to be separated from society. So in this day and age that we're reading of Mice and Men, think of the rights Lenny would have had if George weren't there. Okay? What'd you say? I think you said nada. None. Absolutely none. Okay? He would have been forcibly sterilized, would have been placed in an institution. Ray.
Can I close the door?
Yes, are you cold? I'm sorry. Ray's like got gloves on and a hat. Alright. So now let's get to... That doesn't really matter. Okay. So in 1950, we have authors who are writing stories about their daughters born with disabilities. So we're raising awareness, correct, in the 1950s. This is well after Mice and Men has been published. Caleb, are you with me? Okay. In 1958, we had a landmark law. President Dwight Eisenhower passes PL 85926, the first federal legislation established to provide funds for university training programs in the field of special education. Okay, so this is the first law that we have that says, okay, we're going to give schools money for special education, for any type of disability. Yes?
So they sterilize them, but if, let's just say you have Down syndrome.
Okay. Yeah, Down syndrome is a condition.
Yeah, my cousin.
Okay.
And so if you have children, it does not necessarily mean they're going to have Down syndrome.
Yes.
So it's...
But the risk was too great in this age that you would damage society. Okay? So, if your cousin, let's say your cousin was born in the 1930s, so you've been forcibly sterilized in certain states. Because certain states had those laws. Okay, that one that was up here, that was 1930, where was it? 1920, 1912, right? Would have been forcibly sterilized. I think it said Indiana was the first law. Indiana, first state. Mary.
So say someone has like a simple learning disability or it's not really noticeable, but like it comes to education, would that even be like?
Well, remember I said, I'm not sure, but it would have to be up to the doctor's discretion. Because the doctor would determine.
They could argue that they can't do anything.
Yeah, and if you had a doctor that was like, oh, you don't have an intellectual disability, you're not gonna be on a list. So I'm not sure they didn't like go house to house, like finding people. I'm sure there's doctors that diagnosed.
Their behaviors were, you know, everybody has a friend or a relative that has a really kind of crazy behavior, whether it was bipolar. You know, now we know it is bipolar, or all these different things. Back then, they were very, very quick to diagnose and say, "Gee, you belong over there."
Mm-hmm. And we didn't know about all the conditions there are today scientifically, correct? So a lot of advancements. So at that time, it was just, oh, you're just a menace to society, and you were shunned. Yeah, I'll let you.
My grandpa, where you see things backwards. Let's go again. Like
Oh, when he reads? Dyslexia, yes.
He
Yes.
used to get hit at school because he just don't care.
Did you guys hear that?
Couldn't actually read.
So Elijah was saying when his grandpa, he had dyslexia, which is an intellectual disability, right? It's a disability of reading. You can't help it. So you read words backwards. He would get hit at school.
That's just myself.
How does that help you? Like, oh good, I'm going to be able to read right now. Okay, that's not how it works.
Like,
Yes.
It's like when you
we're
take
good.
the cereal
We're
because it's
good.
not working,
Yes,
but it works.
that's not how it works, but they didn't really understand it. I got that, Elijah? All right, where are we? Okay. All right, so we're now in the 60s. Okay, when was this book written? 1937. Cava. Kate and name, I thought. So our book was written in the 1930s. So are we getting a grasp as to why George was so protective of Lenny and didn't want Lenny talking?
Yes.
Okay, are we understanding a little better? So now we're in the 60s. We have the institution census speaks it in 1967. So almost 200,000 people with intellectual disability living in state-run institutions. All right? So based off of how they treat these people with the forced sterilizations, right? How do you think these state-run institutions looked? Do you think they looked nice and pretty and clean?
No.
Okay. If they don't,
Concentration camps.
kind of probably more like concentration camps, right? Because if you're seen as kind of like not able to contribute to society, they don't necessarily care what happens, okay?
Also, they're not getting the money, which kind of doesn't make any sense. How they,
What do you mean?
Well, it's not like families were paying for their.
No.
So, like,
They were state-run institutions. So
right,
what that
how do they
means,
afford it?
the state's money and the federal government's money is what funded it.
Oh, I see.
Because the government really decided that these people couldn't contribute to society. So therefore, they were going to be like wards of the state, where the state was in basically protection of them. So all that funding that came in was through state and federal government resources.
So that could have been spent something.
Just like a prison,
Right.
right? Who funds the prisons? The state and the federal government. Same thing here. Yes, Hayden. Yes. Okay. So we have 1968, the first Special Olympics is held. 1968. Okay. So we're starting to make some progress. In 1971, we... You good, kid?
They're debating.
All right.
Yes, why he asked.
So that I don't look at him when he goes to sound like, where are you going, Kaden?
That's what you do.
I do that. That's why you ask. Okay. So we had a landmark case, all right. It says it supports the right of all children with intellectual disabilities to a public education. Malachi, if that was the case that supported the rights of all children with intellectual disabilities to a public education, were they previously getting school?
No.
No. Because this was the case that said every kid with a disability gets to go to school. Previously, you didn't. Okay? All right, so this is Willowbrook was one of the most packed. Johnny, say with me. Packed institutions. Okay, intellectual disability institutions. So there was a big journalistic investigation that kind of went in, and he exposed what was happening, and he released photos, and that was the big thing that kind of sparked this movement and kind of getting out of the institution. Okay. So in 1975, we have President Gerald Ford signed into law the Education for All Handicapped Children Act. It's called the IDEA. We have it today. Compelling schools to provide full educational opportunities. 1975. How long ago was that? 50-ish years?
45 years.
45 years? Okay.
45.
So only 45 years ago that law came into action. That all students get full educational services. Yes, Johnny.
Real quick, it says there was something called Willowbrook hepatitis experiments. What's that about?
Ooh, so listen to this. This is even worse, okay? So have you guys learned about Nazi Germany and all of Holocaust and the experimentation on the Jews?
Yeah.
Okay, that's because the Jews were dehumanized, correct? According to the Nazis, they were less than humans. In this situation, Kyle, stay with me. In this situation, the same thing happened, okay? They would experiment on those in the institutions. So I think the hepatitis one, if you research a little more, they would inject kids with hepatitis in order to see their reactions, in order to like help develop a vaccine. Yeah.
They would also like use electrical bolts or something.
You're talking about lobotomies, right?
No, lobotomies is where you cut like something like a
You cut the brain in half.
You take a,
Yeah. You cut like
So you
take a big nail and you go right here.
no,
That's lobotomy.
no, lobotomy is
This
where
is
you
really
put
interesting.
No, I'm pretty sure the lobotomy is where the connections are cut to the right brain.
Yeah.
I only have it right here.
Google it. Johnny.
That makes so much sense.
Johnny.
It says, mentally retarded children housed at the Willowbrook State School in Staten Island, New York, were intentionally given hepatitis in an attempt to track the development of the viral infection. The study began in 1956 and lasted for 14 years.
How disturbing is that? I'm gonna inject a bunch of kids with hepatitis to see what happens. Reagan?
Figured out what a lobotomy is.
What is it?
A surgical procedure in which the nerve pathways in the lower lobes of the brain are severed from those in other areas.
Yeah, so the left and the right brain, the connections, it's like cut in half. And they thought that...
and it calms the people who have outbreaks down so that they don't have thoughts. Or,
That was the intention, but
Yeah.
it didn't always work. There was a lot... No, there were a lot of inhumane things done. There was the electros where they would do electrotherapy where they would like shock them, thinking that it would make them better. Right? Johnny has extras. We could spend 2 weeks on this. All right. I'm not an expert in history. I don't know all the details. But what I'm trying to get out of this is you guys understand the context of Mice and Men. Okay, what was John Steinbeck trying to do by using Lenny as this type of character? John.
Maybe open people's eyes about like how people were treated.
Okay. What else? What other ideas? Why would he use Lenny as this type of character? Malachi?
To show the background of the time period and to give it better understandings.
Okay, remember, what did we talk about with migrant farm workers? What was Steinbeck's intention? What was Steinbeck's intention, Tony?
Expose their conditions.
Okay, so do you think he might have been trying to expose the issues in the time period, the way the mentally ill or the intellectually disabled were treated? It's likely. Okay, so if you guys are interested, this goes all the way down into today's time, so in 2013, because there's still laws being passed, right? But really focus on the time period that we just talked about of when this novel is based around Lenny, okay? So the 20s and the 30s. Really focus on what was happening there and maybe why George was so protective over him. All right? Johnny?
So I'm kind of wondering why George is so protective over Lenny. Because it never really seems.
Can someone give an idea maybe why? Faith?
He didn't want to end up like the rest, like how the rest of the people were being treated.
So those other people that had intellectual disabilities, what was happening to them? Okay. Caleb?
They said something like Lenny's Aunt Clara asked George to look over him.
Yes.
Oh yeah, no, I remember that.
Yes.
Like some of those deathbed vows.
Yeah. Okay, so he knew Aunt Clara, right? And Aunt Clara was like, please take care of him. So maybe this is his way of taking care of him. Brand.
Oh, I had a quick question. What happened to people that like got injected with hepatitis? Like, what were the symptoms?
I mean,
I'm not sure.
you can die from hepatitis. You get very ill. In today's world, we have vaccines and modern medicine is so much more advanced, right?
Okay.
But back then, they didn't have the vaccine for it. Johnny.
Okay, it says.
Look at you pulling up textual evidence. So proud.
It says they were both born in Auburn, and George knew Lenny's aunt. And then when his aunt died, Lenny just came along with George, and George just kind of got used to him after a while.
And so why do you think Lenny would be like, or why do you think George would be like, Lenny, don't talk to the boss?
Because they wouldn't get the job.
They wouldn't get the job. Do you think the boss might make some calls about Lenny?
Yeah.
Okay, Tony? Girls.
That either he would get kicked out or he would probably arrested or taken into custody and taken.
Yeah. So based on the way that society isolated someone with an intellectual disability, do you think someone would want Lenny working on their farm?
Yes.
Probably not. Okay.
They want him with.
Remember how I said it kind of had a contagious effect? Where people were so, like, anxious. They thought the bad things that were happening in society were due to people with intellectual disabilities.
Kind of like the Black Knight.
Kind of. In a way. Okay. So you wouldn't want someone working on your farm in fear, right? That's the time period they're living in. So what your guys' assignment, first of all, to do today is you're going to make connections to Mice and Men within chart on page 3 of your packets. So let me pull it up really quick.
Oh, another thing is that they referred to him as a kid like a lot, and it said somewhere on the timeline something about how no matter their age, they're always referred to.
Yeah,
as
they
kids.
said that. They said that.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right, Johnny, hold up. Okay, eyeballs. Shh. Everyone look at me. Or the board, not me. Aiden, Kava. Ava, Kaden. Okay. Aiden wants to come. All right, instructions. I'll wait for everyone to look.
Should they all have packets?
Yes, they all show packet. I'll wait till everyone has one on their desk and they're looking at the board. We're going to go over the instructions again.
You have
I do. Who do you So my son printed these out and stapled them backwards.
That's why I did the wrong sign.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Well, as he said,
What'd you say?
as he said, he
said
didn't
it at
really
least
care.
80 times.
Wait,
said it a lot.
He kept saying
Kept saying this.
Kept
He
saying
wasn't
that
gonna
he wasn't going to enter the next year.
I can hear what you do, but I don't.
Yes, because kids' education is just not important. All right, if you have your packet up, please hold it up so I know that you have it. Everyone should be holding a packet up.
Yep.
We're reading it from. All right. Thank you. Okay. So from the back side, it should look like this. All right, I'll wait.
Sorry.
You're good. Those are just you feeling. All right, Johnny. Thank you, Levi. I totally see you have your packet. Thank you, Charles. Proud of you guys, all three of you.
Put your hand down now.
Okay, instructions. Aiden, Lincecum, will you read the instructions, please?
After viewing the timeline of events and legislation for those with disabilities, make a note of any connections to life events. Particularly, consider how the social time period will affect the way Lenny is treated in the novel. You need at least 4 connections and use evidence from the timeline.
All right, so here's what you're doing. Everyone needs to be looking at the board. Okay. On the left, you are identifying something within the timeline. So you're going to go back to the timeline. Don't stalls. Okay. You're going to go back to the timeline. So if I see, okay, I'm going to point out here, and I see the connotation of these words of that refer to those disabilities is kind of disgusting, right? To call it imbecility and feeble-mindedness and mental deficiency, I might put that in my timeline section. So I'm going to go back, and I'm going to quote that in my timeline section. I'm going to connect it to Mice and Men. And I'm going to say, okay, maybe this is why George is scared of Lenny letting people know that he's a little bit slower. That's what he uses, right? He says Lenny is a little bit slower. He doesn't want him talking to the boss. He doesn't want him talking to anyone. Because people have this connotation of those disabilities, okay? I might come back here, and I might say, those in this time period with disabilities were put in institutions. So I might use that as a quote, and then I might come back to Mice and Men, and I might say, this is why George is so protective over Lenny. Because if Lenny didn't have someone to take care of him, he would be put into an institution. Do you see how we're making connections?
Yeah.
Okay.
When was it Mice and Men written?
1929.
So it was published in 1937. Yeah. Okay. So after all the reviews and editing and everything, it was published in 1937. So what you really want to look at are the 1900s to the 1930s. Okay. So the point of this unit is to show you guys that authors utilize historical context, what's happening. Okay. Literature is like a window into what was happening. So while in history you guys are reading factual things, this is what happened, literature is a story into what's happening. Okay? So they're very connected. Johnny.
So you said that it was published in 1937, and you also said that earlier that maybe Steinbeck was trying to
Expose.
Yeah. So how did it get published if he was trying to expose all of this?
Is it overt, his goal of exposing this?
No.
You don't necessarily know unless you're studying the literature.
Yeah.
Right? He won a Pulitzer Prize for Grapes of Wrath and how he exposed the living conditions of the migrant farm workers. So it might not have been accepted at that time, but in years down the road, people understood what he was doing. And people read of Mice and Men back then, right? And they connected to Lenny. So even if you thought this and you thought people with disabilities should be separated, they might have written this and had empathy for Lenny, right? Don't you guys love Lenny? Like, as a character, you love him, and you're like, he needs rabbits.
He wants
He needs his rabbits, right? So it created empathy for a character that people had ostracized from society. So did he achieve his goal if that's what it was? Likely. Elijah. Did I answer your question?
No, I had to say something about the story going on.
Okay, so go ahead and work on this. Remember, you're connecting what's happening in the resource, and if you're really interested and want to research outside information on legislation and things that were happening in this time period with those disabilities, you're more than welcome to incorporate that information. Okay? So, I'll leave the timeline up. You're connected to events of mice and men. Hold on, let me pause the... On me, just give me 2 minutes, and then you can go back to work. Okay? Mary, can you turn around real quick, friend? Johnny, headphones out. Kyle, focus.
I love how you're so used to saying that you don't even realize I don't have
I know. Jillian, look at me. Okay? So next, the last thing you have today is a response. Okay? So we can either start on this or wait till you're done. So listen. There's a quote. Okay? Families with mentally ill people in 1930 were often ashamed of having such members in their families. Therefore, they were often kept hidden, sent to asylums, or even rejected from the families altogether. In other cases, families that were not ashamed of having mentally ill members of their families might deny that they were mentally ill. People with intellectual disabilities were often blamed for their very disability or seen as victims of bad fate. Okay, so this is a quote from a company that focuses on this type of history. So, in at least 150 words, explain how this quote connects to Of Mice and Men, particularly the character of Lenny. According to this timeline of events, as well as this quote, do you think that John Steinbeck is accurately portraying how Lenny would have been treated in the period? Remember, Steinbeck published this novel in 1937. So 2 things you're doing in this assignment. 1, you are explaining how this quote connects to Of Mice and Men, particularly Lenny. Okay? And 2, do you think that based off this quote and based off the timeline we just discussed, that Lenny's character in the historical period is accurately portrayed by John Steinbeck? That's what you're answering. Yes?
So can we take into consideration the fact that George is basically keeping him hidden so that nobody knows Lenny is...
That's kind of why that quote was chosen, right? Because that's kind of what George is doing. He's making sure that no one points Lenny out as any different. Right? So 2 things, remember. Explaining how it connects to Of Mice and Men, especially Lenny. And 2, according to this information, do you believe that John Steinbeck is accurately portraying what it would be like in the 1930s to be either someone that has an intellectual disability or someone that has a mental illness? Okay? Is Lenny like a real character? Would this have happened to him in this society? Or would he have been treated worse or would he have been treated better? Okay? You guys should always be thinking like this when you read something. Is this accurate? Okay? Is this really what would have happened? Whether it's literature, whether you're reading a lawyer's letter that says you're the lottery winner, okay? That would be nicer. You guys should always read something kind of going through, is this accurately portrayed? Yes, Malachi.
This says that it's due Thursday by 8 a.m.
I know, it's due tomorrow.
Okay.
It's
But
Thursday.
if you win like $1 billion lottery, the government steps in and takes like $500 million.
It's called taxes, bro. It sucks.
Because governments.
Taxes are not cool. Your taxes pay me.
No, it was on times.